And we continue at 2:07 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wiggs at the sports desk across the glass.
John, since school was shut down today for LAUSD, Superintendent Alberto Carvalho in today's Storm press conference thought he'd offer an English lesson in the form of stupid metaphors.
Some will say that we dodged a bullet. I will say we dodged a weather bomb.
Now, I don't know if you know this, Randy, but he once did a duet with the great Tom Jones. It was a variation of the song Sex Bomb.
All right, let me see if I can have that ready for you at 2:29. A lot of song requests today, but I am here for you.
It's Love Lines on Coast. 800-222-KABC is telephone number 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He has a brand new book out called What's Killing America? Inside the Radical Left's Tragic Destruction of Our Cities, available online at Amazon.com, on loan to us from the great city of Seattle, Jason Rantz. Jason, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad about the release of this book, because so much of what is plaguing your city in Seattle is also what's plaguing us here in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, all the major cities across the United States, where you have government that essentially doesn't function, and they don't conduct the basic duties of government. They have all kinds of opinions on what's going on with global warming and what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on the other side of the world, but they don't really have strong opinions about making sure that the cities are safe and that the homeless are not allowed to do drugs outside in front of everyone, or that the trains and the buses are safe to ride on. They don't care much about that, things that they theoretically have some degree of control over. They'd rather spend their time talking about pie-in-the-sky ideas about social issues going on in other states. When did this start, and when do you think this will end?
So it started a while ago, but it feels like it started semi-recently. And the reason why is because during the Black Lives Matter riots and rallies, you basically got a lot of these city councils and mayors and state legislatures activated to actually use the momentum that the BLM movement created to either pass some of the pie-in-the-sky ideas that could never see the light of day before then, and others finally implemented some of the plans that they had been laying out there for about a decade or so. It depends on the city that we're talking about. But we've generally been seeing clearly people taking advantage of the BLM movement and using the arguments that police are systemically racist, that equity has never been met, that our systems are systems of oppression. They basically convinced folks that what they were doing is right, because, you know, it wasn't that long ago. We all remember the way that this country sort of was seduced by the BLM movement. And I think for the most part, your average person who saw what happened to George Floyd was disgusted. They wanted to see some kind of reform because they were taught that these incidents were happening all around the country. And so they gave a lot of power to the radical left that have pretty much taken over every major city in this country. And when I went back and I looked at the policies that I believe are responsible for a lot of what we've been seeing on the ground, whether it's the issues you mentioned, homelessness, the crime surge, drug addiction, but also the housing first models, the free money that we're just giving away for reparations, what's been going on in our schools. I can tie it directly to basically the same set of policies popping up all across the country. These are the same concepts. They're driven by the same ideology, and we're getting the same results. It's why a homeless policy in Seattle, which matches what's going on in San Francisco and in New York, get exactly the same results, which is way worse homelessness. drug use that's out of control because it's part of an ideology. And when you allow ideology to take hold in decisions over policy, you end up becoming blinded by the consequences of that policy. So there are a lot of people who want to pretend that what it is we're seeing is not a result of anything they did, but a result of not going far enough, which is why it's particularly dangerous. We are, in a lot of ways and in a lot of cities, at a point where you can continue to go left to the city's detriment. We're seeing that on display right now in San Francisco. Or you can make a right turn. It doesn't have to be a sharp right. I'm not saying that all of a sudden Seattle and LA and New York and these cities are going to become or should even become conservative. That's just not going to happen. But if they don't course correct, what's happening in San Francisco now, which is a city I think that's dying in front of our very eyes, is going to happen everywhere else. And there's some folks who don't think it can get any worse. Yes, it can. There are others who think that they can escape these big cities and that these policies won't implement where they live. They're quickly finding out that that's not the case. And that's a big reason why I wrote the book, What's Killing America.
Let's talk about this from the point of view of voters, because I'm a big believer that you get the government you deserve. And you talk to people in these cities, they're not stupid. They're aware of their surroundings. They know the city is dirty. They know it's not safe to go to certain neighborhoods. They know that they're going to get harassed by homeless people if they ride public transit. Mm-hmm. They know this, yet they continue to vote for the people that produce that lifestyle that they then have to live every single day. I understand having strong political beliefs. I understand you're team blue and you're blue all the way, and that's just the way you are. But you do have to live there. And who wants to be looking over their shoulder all the time if you don't know you're going to get hit on the back of the head? There's a story we just did last hour about a smoke shop in Oakland where the woman has 7 layers of security to get in her shop, and she's still been robbed 10 times. At what point do you say to yourself, okay, I need to check myself and I need to vote for different people, because even though I believe strongly the way I believe, I don't want to live like this anymore?
Yeah. So I think there are a few reasons we're seeing what we're seeing. Number one is I think that there is a reluctance of voters who are driven by their principles, their ideology, to acknowledge that something is failing, because they understand that then they'll get blamed. And they should get blamed. They implemented policy that doesn't make sense. But I understand why someone might not want to admit that, because then they will feel the share of the blame. And that's a pretty crummy feeling when you can point to policy as destroying people's lives, sometimes literally. In other cases, I think that there are well-intentioned voters who just don't do the research that's necessary to understand the why something is going wrong, why a policy isn't working, why politicians in positions of power think the way that they do. We have seen over and over and over again a really – and this doesn't really change from city to city. Local media is not particularly good. They're not good at connecting dots. Now, talk radio, I think, is an exception because you have the ability to go long form on some of these topics. And if you're like me on my radio show here in Seattle, I don't rely on getting access to the governor's office or the mayor of Seattle. I don't care one way or the other if they ever come on my show. And so I can go ahead and point to their blame, point to them as being responsible without fear that I'm going to get cut off. When you look at local television networks and, local newspapers already, which are already pretty far to the left, they are reluctant to be brutally honest with consumers, because if all of a sudden the governor's office says to you, yeah, I'm no longer going to grant you any interviews, well, that severely impacts your job. That's necessary for your job if you're a reporter at these local TV stations. And so they just don't really dive in. And then third, and I think that this is the most tragic reality for a lot of folks, unless they personally experience a negative effect of something that they support, either directly or they know someone who's been impacted, I don't think they're going to change their minds. I think we have a growing number of folks who have just created this echo chamber. They live that in Seattle, in Portland, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, D.C., and once they step out of that echo chamber, once they're forced out because they experience something, well, then they think a little bit differently. And a perfect example I cover in the book is what's been going on in San Francisco. You had, in particular, Asian American parents who saw the equity movement at their kids' school. And all of a sudden, a school that they worked really hard to get their kids into because it's the top performing school, well, all of a sudden it's not top performing anymore because they went from a merit-based system to a lottery. And it allowed in kids who otherwise would not qualify to go to that school. And these parents said to themselves, well, this is not what we want for our kids. And then you have a school board at the exact same time, instead of addressing some of these issues, what they've ended up doing is try to change the names of schools because the owners or the school namesakes own slaves, or had questionable principals at the time, judging by 2021, 22 standards. And so what did the families do, in large part led by Asian American parents? They recalled everyone who was up for recall. They got activated because they were pushed into a reality where they were impacted by really poor policy decisions and politicians that they put in power. And now they're trying to save their city. They go after DA Chesaboudin because, again, lots of people started to be impacted personally by crime. They made a move there. Ultimately, it might have been too late when they decided to make those moves because even now they're getting resistance in the activist community to going after open drug use. I don't know if they're going to survive this, but it does tell you that we have a lot more power than we realize. We just need to get people more activated.
I'll tell you, and this varies market to market, but I will defend the California press corps, at least on the broadcast side of this, because you have the big city newspapers, which are just absolutely awful, and they ignore so many of the big stories that need to be exposed, that need to be talked about. The L.A. Times, certainly at the top of the list. San Francisco Chronicle, Sacramento Bee, certainly this applies to them. There are a few broadcast networks, broadcast channels that I would throw in with them, Public Radio and Spectrum News. But the rest of them down here, at least, are reporting on these zany stories. They're reporting on the smash and grabs. They're reporting on the failures of our local elected officials. In fact, I want to play two clips for you. The first one is of Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon, who was having a press conference that was largely attended by broadcast reporters, and he was getting his feet held to the fire on his various failures in office, leading to a spike in crime. He blamed the press corps for the perception that crime is bad in Los Angeles.
What do you say to the person who points a finger at you, saying that there are people in this community who believe they can get away with serious crime in LA County and not be held accountable?
Well, I would ask you the question, what would you tell him when you just heard me speaking right now? Because I think you have a responsibility also for addressing it, right? So I would hope that you do so.
And then here's L.A. Mayor Karen Bass blaming the news media for the perception that Los Angeles is not safe.
When you have a spectacular type crime happen like this, it does create a sense of fear. But one of the reasons it does is because it's exploited by the press, and especially the conservative press that wants to paint Los Angeles and many other Democratic-run cities as though we are in a crisis of crime, and that is not the case.
They believe that simply reporting the facts as to what's happening is biased in and of itself, and because of that, we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, we've seen that line get used over and over and over again over the course of the last few years. Another example I cover in the book is that, at one point, and we still use this, mostly used on the right, which is Democrat-run cities are seeing an increase in crime. Right, we're very clearly seeing crime surges. It depends on the crime city to city, but for the most part, we're talking about violent crime and car theft and anything having to do with drug-related crimes. And so the response back about a year ago when this argument was being pushed ahead of the election was, Oh, it's actually a MAGA state problem. In fact, the red states are the states that have the most crime. And it was a rhetorical sleight of hand. They were arguing a point we weren't arguing. We were focusing on cities. They focus on states. And all you have to do is look at the cities in those red states that are leading to more crime for those red states, and they're run by Democrats. When you look specifically at those cities in Missouri, last year Missouri was at the top of the list of the states with the most violent crime. Well, that was being led by Democrat-run cities, policies that adopted the defund movement or the defunding posture, folks who decided to get rid of cash bail. That was responsible for the spike. So they're trying to gaslight folks, and part of me just doesn't understand why they think that's going to work on crime issues. People feel the way they feel. People know folks who had their cars broken into or their favorite business ends up getting ransacked. Like, they know that's going on. And to tell them to their face, no, you're wrong for thinking that there's no crime crisis, what do you mean? It seems so to me counterproductive, but when you're used to having a media, and I think this is where it comes in, and I'm glad in certain circumstances individuals are pushing back who are reporters. I think they need to do more of that. But they believe that they can just get away with this because the media will go along. The problem is you'll have the LA Times go along. And that is a significant issue that they know that they can count on, and so they feel like they can continue to lie. They know that the national media outlets, CNN, MSNBC, will also pick up on that posture. It's working, or it has worked. It's starting to get pushback. It's starting to be seen as just flat-out gaslighting, but it's still getting some results. And until we sort of shake that, until we demand more of local media, and frankly just do our own research, until we do that, this is going to continue.
Last question before you go. We know how important these big city newspapers are. Even though they're not making the money they used to make, they have circulation problems, they have revenue problems, they have a lot of pension debt and things of that nature. They still punch above their weight. They still have an obscene amount of power in the cities that they cover, where they're the newspaper of record. How different do you think things would be in these cities if, let's say, a Peter Thiel or some conservative billionaire were to go into these cities and start buying up these papers and highlighting all of the problems in these cities and reporting on all of the problems in these cities? And instead of having their foot on the gas pedal going off the cliff, they tried to keep these people coloring inside the lines and performing the basic duties of government the way they're supposed to.
I certainly think that politicians would feel more pressure to change, because ultimately whoever controls the culture will control most of the arguments. And right now, Democrats control the culture. That's starting to shift because of, I think, a miscalculation on the left side when it comes to gender identity issues. I think they very clearly, according to every poll, they're on the wrong side of that. And so folks are starting to wake up to that reality and push back. But if you had a fair press, if you had a press just in a general sense that connected dots for readers or viewers or listeners, I think things would change. Because when you're being told the reason why you're seeing a surge in rape is because of policy X, the reason why you're seeing a surge in motor vehicle theft is policy Y, well, all of a sudden that's something that's concrete that you can point to and say, okay, well, let's just change that. That's really easy for people to do. And when they feel called to do some form of activism, whatever that means to an individual, it just makes it easier for them to get involved. You're working with a very specific end goal. And when you have those end goals, it just makes everything so much easier, because then you can fire off an email, you can fire off a phone call, you can fire off a tweet that talks about these things, and all of a sudden there starts to develop an actual narrative based in truth, based in the reality of what's going on. And it's hard for a lot of these politicians who are desperate to stay in power to continue to lie and go against that narrative. If they get the sense that the people are making certain demands, the ones who are just desperate for power, they will get in line. And I would rather them be pushed into a decision by the rational members of all of these cities than the radical left. And right now, we've ceded a lot of this power to the radical left, and they're calling the shots. And again, that's why I wrote, in large part, What's Killing America.
Jason Rantz. The book is What's Killing America Inside the Radical Left's Tragic Destruction of Our Cities, available online at Amazon.com. Jason, congratulations on the book. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Well, Terry writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com and says, guys, I don't know if you're aware about this, but in a particularly dark period in her life, Barbara Ferrer briefly joined the Jay Giles Band. And don't you worry, she was not the angel in the centerfold, but she did have a hand in Love Stinks.
Love Stinks. Yeah. Yeah.
Somehow that slipped my mind.
By the way, during the commercial break, we also found out about Alberto Carvalho's new duet with Tom Jones.
You know what you are?
Weather bomb. Weather bomb.
You're
Weather bomb.
you can give it to me when I need to come along.
Weather bomb. Weather bomb.
You're my
Weather bomb.
and baby, you can turn me on.
If you want to listen to a podcast edition of the show, Randy, that's easy to do.
That's right. Go to KBC.com, click on podcast, go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all of the episodes. You could also go to YouTube, search for The John Phillips Show. Listen to them in any order that you want. 2 o'clock first, then the 1 o'clock, then the 12 o'clock. That's like going from front to back.
We often lead from the front, but it's time for us to lead from the back.
Well, as many of you know, we've been covering the various failures of the fake doctor in the LA County Department of Public Health. And one of the things that happened after we were covering this department and their various abuses of power is that we provided pushback, along with many others, to their proposed mask mandate that they wanted to bring back after every other county in the state of California got rid of their mandates, including Alameda County, which was the last one before LA tried to do it, to have a mask mandate on the books. And they eventually got rid of it because in Northern California, unlike Southern California, the counties are much smaller. And you had neighboring counties, San Mateo, San Francisco, Marin, etc., where they didn't have a mask mandate, and the numbers were virtually exactly the same as Alameda County. So Alameda County eventually decided to get rid of it. Well, after that happened, the village idiot down here, fake doctor, decided that she wanted to bring it back. And we pushed and we pushed and we pushed back on this. And eventually she had to back down because she lost 3 out of the 5 votes on the LA County Board of Supervisors. Well, she didn't like the fact that she was getting pushed back. So what did she do? She went to her political operatives that work in her office and went to Adam Schiff's office, the then chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives, and asked for help at Twitter to silence our voices. And because of a lawsuit that has been filed by LA parents against the LA County Department of Public Health, through discovery, we found out exactly how they were doing it, which is they went through that office, through Adam Schiff's office, to Twitter in writing, asking for them to punish me. In fact, the link that they gave was specifically to me. They wanted me, I guess, censored from Twitter or kicked off Twitter or whatever it was that they wanted. And then there was a second one, which was an alternative LA County Public Health Department account that would then allow you to comment on their tweets because they disallowed you to comment on anything they posted on social media because they didn't want any counter arguments attached to their tweets. They only wanted their information, and that was it. Well, we have a congressman who's now proposing legislation that would make that illegal. Kevin Kiley is a congressman who represents the suburbs of Sacramento in California's 3rd District. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin Kiley CA. Congressman Kevin Kiley, welcome.
Thanks, John. Good to be with you.
You know, when those emails were made public and I saw that they specifically went after me to Twitter and people were surprised that this happened, I was literally the least surprised person on planet Earth. In fact, I would be surprised if they didn't try to abuse their power in that way. But it seems like a lot of people down here were surprised when they found out that a public health department was acting like Tammany Hall. This is not something that's unique to Los Angeles, but it's where we live, and it's a definite abuse of power to my eye. Your thoughts?
Well, I'd say first, the fact that they went after you is a badge of honor because you were helping to get out the truth and giving people a means of fighting back against policies that were so outrageous that literally no one else was doing them. And indeed, you and others were successful in getting the Department of Public Health not to reinstitute yet another mask mandate at a time when no one else had one. But the fact that you had, the public agency in LA County, funded by taxpayers, that was doing everything it possibly could to silence dissent, turning off comments on its own Twitter handle, getting another forum on Twitter, another handle removed so that people couldn't comment there, colluding with the Office of Congressman Schiff. I mean, just in order to prevent people from expressing their opinion on a matter where, by the way, the department was so clearly wrong and out of the mainstream, it is, truly chilling that this is something that happened in our state and in our country. And, the legislation we're working on is designed to assure that this sort of thing does not happen again.
Well, and it's not just them targeting people like me or targeting other accounts that were giving the people of Los Angeles County an opportunity to ask questions or make counter arguments or voice their opinions. They were also trying to silence the opinions of medical doctors, including medical doctors for USC, who the county partners with. They were trying to get op-ed pieces that were written by actual medical doctors removed from the pages of the LA Daily News online because they didn't like the point of view. That's more akin to Tammany Hall than a public health agency.
Well, that's a great point, is that you actually had, folks who were relying on actual science who are coming out and directly contradicting what Barbara Ferrer and the Department of Public Health were saying. You had the main hospital there that was coming out and saying her data that she was using was incorrect. I think that she relied on a study from her own daughter as her main data point. So, the idea that the department was trying to squelch legitimate debate from people with expertise in the field in favor of the pseudoscience being propagated by the department itself, nothing could be more antithetical to what this country is about, to what the First Amendment requires, and to what is the best method for arriving at a sound public policy.
What's interesting about her, too, is that she has an awful relationship with the LA Press Corps because she wants all of her communication to be one way, where it's her telling you what the facts are, what the science is, what the rules will be, and you just follow her rules and follow her instructions or else. And she doesn't sit down to many interviews. She doesn't do many local television interviews. She doesn't do many local radio interviews. She goes on the national cable channels extremely sparingly. She wants you to just hear what she has to say, and she doesn't want any follow-up questions at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. What does that tell you? What is she afraid of? Why is she not being as transparent as possible with the public? I mean, isn't that what a public health officer should do, is provide as much transparency as possible? And I don't represent L.A., but during all the COVID insanity, I kept a close eye on what she and the Department of Public Health there were doing because it dictated, policy for California as well, because she'd do something completely crazy. And then Newsom would say, well, look at that. I need to catch up with L.A., and he'd do it for the whole state. And so, this one department and this one, completely irresponsible and unaccountable leader really did, an incalculable amount of damage, not only for the millions of people in L.A. County, but for our state as a whole.
A lot of people don't follow local California political news, even in the state of California, let alone outside the state of California. how much does she cut through the noise? Like when you're in Congress and you're talking about what's going on in California, and the name Barbara Ferrer comes up when you're talking to a colleague in Florida or Texas, do they know who she is and what her portfolio is?
I'm not sure they would know about her in particular, but I think they are well aware of how far California has gone off the rails and how, truly insane things got here during the COVID shutdowns. And so, Barbara Ferrer is known by some throughout California as the person who was, behind a lot of this in sort of a Fauci-like capacity. But I think that, people across the country are certainly familiar with what's happened in California and are quite eager to avoid something similar in those states.
I would imagine that the Speaker of the House, who's from California, is well aware of who she is.
Yes, of course.
What kind of reaction do you get from your colleagues when you tell them about this legislation? Do you think it's going to get support in the House to get through?
I think it will get support in the House, and I'm hopeful that it will eventually become law because, this is pretty fundamental, the idea that, citizens should not have their speech censored by the government. What we're regulating here is something that the First Amendment already forbids, which is the collusion between government and private actors in the suppression of speech. And so all this bill does is provide a measure of accountability by saying that if you're someone like a Barbara Ferrer, or at least someone in this case in a federal role, and you're actively engaged in the suppression of speech and efforts at censorship, then you'll be held accountable for that.
And I don't think you can discount the position that Adam Schiff held when he helped her abuse her power. He was not just some run-of-the-mill congressman. He was chairman of the Intelligence Committee. When the chairman of the Intelligence Committee makes the introduction, Twitter knows exactly what that means.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think that was the entire purpose, was this show of force, if you will. And it's exactly what, we are talking about when we refer to the way the government has co-opted private actors to do what the Constitution forbids it from doing, which is to censor speech. So I think that's absolutely right to point that out. It's incredibly troubling to see that his office was involved in this at a very high level. And we absolutely need to make sure we put safeguards in place to assure that it doesn't happen again.
And the voters of California definitely need to hear about this before they select their next senator.
That's right. Absolutely.
Congressman Kevin Kiley. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin Kiley, CA. Congressman, thanks so much for stopping by.
You bet, John.
That's going to do it for us today, but we'll be back tomorrow at noon for another live and local edition of The John Phillips Show right here on Talk Radio 790 KABC.